In the frigid ocean of the North Atlantic, there is a place the world calls dark. You have seen the Red Sea in photos, circulating all over the internet. You have heard the phrase, terrifying ritual. You have read the calls for boycott. But have you ever wondered, if you were born on an island with 257 rainy days each year, where nothing can be grown on the land and the sea has been your family's only source of livelihood for centuries, would you look at that problem differently? Faroe Islands is not a glamorous tourist paradise. It is a small, conservative, autonomous community scrutinized under the lens of the entire world. This is not just a story about whaling. This is a story about tradition confronting the new era, about global ethics confronting local survival, and about an uncomfortable question: who has the right to decide what is civilized? Today, we will go through the fog of prejudice and look at this island with your own eyes. Have you ever wondered or looked into who the Faroe Islands are on the map of Europe? Only a mere 50,000 people. The number is equivalent to an average town in the U.S., with the capacity of a football stadium, yet that community is often scrutinized by the whole world as if they were a global crisis-causing superpower. Faroe is not part of the European Union. They are self-governing, but still part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a political position in limbo, close enough to be noticed, far enough to be misunderstood. I asked a resident of Tórshavn, "Do you feel like you live in a place that the world despises?" He laughed. Shrug. We are busy living. No time to hate anyone. Here, 257 days a year are rainy. That means for every 3 days, 2 days have a gloomy sky. The land is barren, unable to support large-scale farming. The sea is a source of life. Fish and seafood account for over 90% of export value. Imagine the entire economy of your city depending on a single industry. If the sea is no longer alive, Faroe will also disappear. No McDonald's, no global chain, no shopping malls. That's not an anti-capitalist slogan, simply because no one needs it. But in an era where everything must conform to common standards, a small society maintaining its own way of life becomes an annoyance. Brussels talks about standards, the media talks about ethics, the internet talks about outrage. What about the Faroese? They talk about the weather and this year's fish yield. Is the problem that they are doing something wrong? Or is it because they don't do things the way the rest of Europe thinks is right? A small community in the middle of the ocean suddenly became a symbol of controversy. Sometimes I wonder, if they were located in the Mediterranean, with 300 sunny days a year and selling cocktails to tourists, would the world care so much about their ethics? We often judge places we have never set foot in. It's easy. Sitting in front of the screen, clicking the mouse, concluding, but does Brussels really understand life in a place where vegetables cannot be grown? And if you were born here, would you choose differently? If you are interested in questions like these, you know what to do. Stay with me. We have only just begun. Because behind the fog of geography and politics lies a tradition that has sparked fierce debate across Europe. And that's where the real story begins. Let's get straight to what made Faroe a sensational name. The grind. If you've ever watched international news, you've seen those images. The surface of the water changes color. The boats surrounded a pod of pilot whales. Emotional headlines. The media likes strong words. The stronger, the better. Typical is the phrase, medieval times in the 21st century. And so, an island of 50,000 people suddenly became a symbol of backwardness. The story is told in a very simple way. Good and evil. But life is rarely as simple as a newspaper headline. I sat down to talk with a fisherman. The man is in his 50s, calloused hands, deep voice. He said, "We don't go out to sea looking for whales. If they swim into the bay, then we will decide. And not everyone is allowed to participate. In the Faroe Islands, each such event must be reported to the local police chief. He decides whether to proceed or not. If the food reserves are sufficient, they can refuse. It sounds strange in the era of 24/7 supermarkets, but here, an adult pilot whale can provide about a ton of food. 1 ton. Imagine 1,000 kilograms, equivalent to the weight of a small car. Divided among a small community, it's not a spectacle, but a source of nourishment for many families. And importantly, no commercial market, no exports, not sold for profit. Most of it is distributed for free to the community. Hospitals, the elderly, fishermen. A woman I met in Tórshavn said, "We are not proud of the image, but we are also not ashamed of our traditions." Since the 16th century, every event has been recorded, records spanning hundreds of years. In modern Europe, not every industry is that transparent. What about the ecological issue? Some independent studies suggest that the population of pilot whales in the North Atlantic remains stable, estimated at hundreds of thousands of individuals. The number caught each year constitutes a very small percentage of the overall population. Not 10%, not 5%, but it's a very low percentage. This does not make everyone comfortable. But it raises an uncomfortable question. Europe consumes tens of millions of tons of meat each year from massive industrial farming systems. The production chain is as long as an assembly line, clean packaging. No one sees the process behind it. Faroe is different. No factories, no hiding, no greenwashing. Sometimes I wonder, do we react more strongly to what we can see clearly? Images have power, and the images from the Faroe Islands are very hard to watch. But if you live in a place where the land cannot grow grains, where the sea is the only natural refrigerator, would you see things differently? I am not here to make excuses, nor to condemn. I'm here to ask questions. Why is a community of 50,000 people scrutinized more than corporations that supply food to an entire continent? Are our ethics being selectively applied, based on convenience? And more importantly, does tradition have the right to exist when the world changes? If you are still following along, perhaps you are not looking for a simple answer. And that's why I appreciate you staying. Because behind the current argument, there lies a deeper layer of darkness. A bloody Viking past, and a mountain where people were once pushed to their ultimate limits. We will talk about that next. There is a mountain in the Faroe Islands that the locals call Slave Mountain. The name doesn't sound pleasant, and the history behind it is the same. I stood on the edge of that cliff. The wind blows so hard that you have to lean to keep your balance. Below is the North Atlantic Ocean, not a sandy beach, not the gentle blue water, but rather rocks and waves. The height is about a few hundred meters, equivalent to a 70-80-story building. If you look for a long time, you will feel your legs tremble a bit. According to local legend, during the Viking era, those who were no longer able to work or committed serious offenses would be taken up here and never return. There are no official documents detailing each case, but that story has been passed down through many generations, like a collective memory. I asked a guide, who was born and raised here, if he felt ashamed of this story. Do you know how he answered? Very simple, just a shake of the head and the words, "No." That is history. We do not glorify it, but we don't erase it either. Short answer, straight. Faroe was settled in the 9th century. The first Vikings came here not for the scenery. They came for survival. In a place where the land is as thin as a layer of grass on a rooftop, every resource is precious. At that time, there was no welfare system, no hospitals, no retirement fund. Life is measured by the ability to contribute. It sounds harsh. That's true too. But try to put yourself in the context of Europe 1,000 years ago, and you'll understand. Rome had arenas. Medieval Europe had public torture. During the colonial era, the powers redrew the world map with ink and steel. The 20th century, 2 world wars, caused tens of millions of people to disappear from the map of humanity. So why did a cliff in the Faroe Islands become a symbol of darkness, while the rest of the continent is called civilization? Is it because the Faroe Islands are small, and small places are easily labeled? I'm not saying that to excuse the past. The past is the past. But we tend to remember selectively, like adjusting the colors of a photo, brightening the parts you like, darkening the parts you want to forget. A history teacher in Tórshavn told me, "We teach children about the Viking era as part of a long story. Not to be proud, but to understand where we come from." Faroe today is no longer a Viking society. They have an underwater tunnel, they have high-speed internet, they have a modern education system, But the collective memory remains, and perhaps it is precisely because they do not erase the past that the world finds it easier to view them through the old lens. We like simple stories: hero, the villain, light, darkness. But in reality, the two are often mixed up. I stood on that cliff and thought, if the history of every nation were projected on a big screen, uncut, unedited, would we still have the confidence to judge each other? What do we choose to remember, and what do we choose to forget? That question is not just for the Faroe Islands, but for all of Europe, and for ourselves. If you're still here, perhaps you also understand that this story is not just about the past. It also speaks about how a small community preserves its identity in the modern world. Next, we will look at present-day Faroe, an autonomous society outside the EU, controlling its own resources. And the question will become even more interesting. If you find the way we delve into this story worth continuing, you can follow the channel, not because of the algorithm, but because conversations like this need space to exist. Faroe today is not a Viking museum. It is modern, very modern. I drove through an underwater tunnel nearly 11 kilometers long. That is nearly the length of 100 football fields lined up end to end through the depths of the ocean, not just once, but many times. The infrastructure system here amazes me. A country of 50,000 people, but with a network of tunnels connecting the islands as if they were a wealthy state in Northern Europe. Smooth asphalt roads, fast internet, wind and hydro energy account for the majority of electricity production. They aim to be almost self-sufficient in renewable energy in the near future. Isolated? Not really. I asked a young engineer working in the energy sector, "Do you feel like you live on the edge of the world?" He laughed. "We are on the edge of the map, but not on the edge of the future." That statement is worth pondering. Faroe is not part of the European Union. They have chosen to stay out many times, not because they are against Europe, but because they want to control their own marine resources. The fishing grounds are the lifeblood, and when you have 50,000 people, losing control of the source of life means losing everything. Imagine if your city depended 90% of its GDP on a single industry. Would you let someone else set the rules? A businessman in Tórshavn told me, "We are small, but being small doesn't mean we have to obey." It sounds stubborn, but it also makes sense. In the globalized world, where rules are often written in distant capitals, the Faroe Islands chose the opposite model: local decisions, local responsibility. Not perfect. But clearly, Brussels talks about integration, Faroe talks about self-governance. One side talks about common standards, the other side talks about local flexibility. And here's the interesting part. Even though they are outside the EU, the Faroe Islands still trade with Europe. Their fish are present throughout the Nordic market. They are not isolated. They choose to participate on their own terms. Some people would call that conservative. Some people call it realism. The Lutheran culture here still maintains a slow pace of life. Family, church, community. Not the glamorous model of big cities. But it's also not a closed society. The question is global outrage sometimes not just a matter of ethics, but also a matter of control? A small community keeps its resources, keep their own rules. Not everyone feels comfortable with that. I don't draw conclusions. I am just observing. Faroe can be in the middle of the ocean, but they do not drift. They stand firm, like cliffs amidst the waves. So, what do you think? Independent or isolated? Wise or stubborn? If you enjoy analyses like this that are not rushed, you can follow the channel to not miss the next conversations. Here, we don't look for quick answers. We seek the right question, and the next question will go even deeper. Not about politics, but about the psychology of a society living with 257 rainy days each year. How does that change people? 257 rainy days each year. That means more than 2/3 of the year, the sky is gray. Imagine if your city only had sunshine for 100 days. The rest is wind, mist, low clouds. Not an Instagram scene, but the daily reality. Living here for a long time, you start to understand The weather is not just the climate. It's psychological. When you live in a place where the sea decides your meals, where a storm can halt all ferry trips, you develop a different way of thinking. More realistic, less delusional, and sometimes less dependent on the outside world. In the Faroe Islands, there are no supermarkets open 24/7 on every corner. There are no global chains popping up every 500 meters. You don't order everything in 2 hours. You wait, you stock up, you calculate. A woman who works as a teacher shared with me, "We know our neighbors, truly know. Here, if you encounter difficulties, the whole village will know before you even have a chance to speak." Community cohesion is not just a slogan, it is a survival mechanism. When the population is only about 50,000 people, equivalent to a small district, you cannot hide in the crowd. Reputation, whether good or bad, spreads faster than offshore storms. And the interesting thing is, the fewer consumer choices, the less distraction. No shopping malls, no shopping culture to feel better. Instead, it's fishing, home repairs, and family gatherings. Some people would call it backward, but it could also be a different kind of freedom. When living on the edge of the world, you develop a morality tied to survival. You eat what the sea brings. You fix what is broken. You don't waste. We, in large urban areas, often talk about ethics from a very safe position, from the sofa, from a place with 12 different meat options in the supermarket. And here, not many choices, but the decision is very clear. Is a small society like this really stubborn? Or just realistic? If you were born here, in the cold wind and fog, would you think like them? Sometimes, what makes the Faroe Islands controversial is not just the actions, but rather a different mentality, a different rhythm of life, a value system shaped by a harsh geography. And when two value systems collide, globalization and localization, what happens? Next, we will enter the most difficult part, not about tradition, not about history, but about how communication, ethics, and power shape what we believe to be true. There is one thing I have learned after many years of watching the news. The world does not lack truth. The world lacks context. Faroe Islands is a perfect example. A community of 50,000 people, small as a coastal town in the U.S., suddenly became the villain in the global moral narrative. Just a few frames of changing watercolor, a few sensational headlines, and that's enough. The crowd loves simplicity, black or white, while real life is all shades of gray. I sat in a small cafe in Torshov, talking to a tour guide. He said, "Critics often have never been here. They come for the image, and they leave also for the image." Doesn't it sound funny? But it's true for this era. We consume ethics like fast food, hot, salty, easy to swallow, and forget it right after. Now let's ask an uncomfortable question. Why is Faroe getting so much attention? While large-scale food industries around the world produce volumes thousands of times greater every day, only it's behind factory walls, behind clean packaging, behind pastel-colored advertisements. And there's another layer. Power. Faroe stands outside the EU, maintaining significant self-governance over the sea and its resources. In a region like the North Atlantic, where shipping routes, fishing grounds, and economic influence are always a big game, a small community wanting self-determination sometimes makes others uncomfortable. No need for conspiracy theories, just understand the logic. Whoever controls the narrative shapes the emotions. What about international advocacy organizations? Many organizations genuinely work for humanitarian goals, but it must also be acknowledged. They need strong imagery to raise funds. They need clear villains to mobilize the crowd. And Faroe, a little-known island with little PR, is an easy target for storytelling. So the question for you is, do you believe what you see? Or do you believe what you understand after finding enough context? If you were from the Faroe Islands, would you want the world to see you through headlines or through real life? And now, before we conclude, let's return to the biggest question. Is Faroe ultimately a shadow or just a mirror, reflecting the double standards of the modern world? The truth is that Faroe is not perfect. No place is perfect. But this small island forces us to confront difficult questions. Does tradition have a place in the modern world? Is morality always universal? Or does it sometimes depend on the context and who decides which direction the story is told? Perhaps the most controversial thing is not what happens on the beach, but rather how we react to it. Quick, emotional, and often lacking context. I did not come to the Faroe Islands to make excuses, nor to condemn. I come to see, to listen, to ask questions. What about you? Do you think Faroe is a symbol of backwardness, or a small community trying to preserve its identity amidst global pressure? Please leave your opinion below. I really want to hear your perspective on this, especially if you disagree. Civilized discussions are what give value to this channel. If you find these deep, unhurried analyses useful, you can subscribe to accompany us on the next topics. Here, we do not seek comfortable answers. We seek clarity. And one last thing. This video is not intended to encourage or criticize any individual or community. The sole objective is to provide context, data, and a multifaceted perspective for you to draw your own conclusions. Because in a world full of noise, maintaining the ability to ask questions is perhaps the most important thing. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next videos.